Good ass trailer, yeah.
Okay, welcome to Movie Night Extravaganza. I'm here with my always co-host, J. Andrew World, Conan Neutron from Protonic Reversal, the podcast, and Conan Neutron and the Secret Friends. And of course, Kira Roessler, the ex-bassist of Black Flag and an Emmy and Oscar award-winning sound editor for such big titles as Game of Thrones, John Adams, and of course, Mad Max Fury Road, which is the movie that we're here to talk about tonight. So one thing that I wanted to start with, I guess, I'm assuming that probably most people that are watching this have seen Fury Road. And usually, you know, we start with something from a director, but I wanted to start with something political, actually, which is a clip of Kamala Harris talking about water wars and how the future of our warfare is going to be, you know, waged over water, which is something that Fury Road is about.
It's about building back up our infrastructure in a way that we leapfrog. So it's not just about repair. It's about building things. It's about fixing things and building things. We talk about water policy. That's a big deal here in Chicago and in Illinois. Water policy, to do better, well, we need to construct places where we capture water, places where we store water. And here's the other thing, because I also, you know, I'm in a lot of meetings on foreign policy. You know, for years and generations, wars have been fought over oil. In a short matter of time, they will be fought over water. So when we think about building up our economy around our infrastructure on something like water policy, it's literally about jobs. It's about the fundamental source of life that Tammy Duckworth was talking about. It will sustain life. And it's about strengthening up our nation around a commodity that is a precious commodity.
That mask is really reminding me of a Morton Joe at that moment.
Honestly, though, like the wording is terrifying. No, she's not wrong, and I think neither is Fury Road for, you know, making water kind of the central. I mean, you know, it's kind of a fake idea because the real commodity obviously is humans, and kind of that's what the movie is about. But I think that, you know, water is such a central force, and Morton Joe has that line where he talks about, "Do not, my friends, become addicted to water, for it will take hold of you, and you'll resent its absence."
But also, like, water is life.
Aren't we all addicted to water?
You know,
addicted to air.
like the thing is like water is not a commodity because water is a necessity of life, and if you commoditize a necessity of life, you're dealing with issues of now, like, who has more of a right to live, and you're allowing the powerful to become more powerful. I mean,
which is exactly what the story is about, because Immortal Joe has the water
and he has the power.
Yeah.
And in the same way that, you know, when Kamala says, you know, it's in our national interest, America in that case, and obviously the powerful corporate interests in America are the ones who have the water, Nestle and so forth. So it really becomes kind of a terrifying signifier that, like, Fury Road is absolutely on point with that.
Yeah, if it's the government, it's the same thing.
Yeah. So I don't know. So that was kind of a starting point, I guess, to talk about. You know, our tendency to demonize, but it's also, you know, our tendency to demonize under scarcity, to demonize and like mythologize around these things. Like you already see it with you know, conversations about people wasting water. Like, oh well, we don't have enough water. People, you know, you're wasting it, which is perfectly like on point to the same thing that Morton Joe's talking about, I think. You know, creating these national myths or these warlord myths that, you know, the reason that people don't have enough water isn't that they're hoarding it. The reason that people don't have enough water is because, you know, they're water addicts and it's their fault. And, you know, so that was kind of an interesting starting.
Well, California, it's a constant concern. I mean, I've lived in Wisconsin for the past almost 4 years, and they don't care. It's never in the conversation at all. Whereas my entire life in California, it's been series of droughts and don't take too long a shower. And Kira knows all about this. Like, they're always, you know, water cops are always ready to be like, hey, don't do that.
I remember the big
not actual water cops, by the way, but
yeah, no. But in 1990 there was a big special, and Chevy Chase was on there. You know, like they were all giving advice how to conserve water, and he like every once in a while they just have Chevy Chase go shower with a friend, shower with a friend. You know, like that's how you conserve. But like you know, the whole idea is to like put the onus on us as a consumer, as opposed to where the actual problems lie. Right. It's not us that's the problem. It is, you know, the corporations with the pollution. It's the corporations taking the water from the lands. It's the it's poisoning the water supply with the oil spills. The not replacing the lead pipes like in Flint, which I don't think is too far from you, Conan.
Yeah, and if I may, one thing that people not in California may not realize is how much water rights is a big deal in the Central Valley, where a vast majority of the world's food is grown. And it really boils down to, we want to be able to water our crops the same way that we did in the 1930s because it costs us less money. So what they do is they flood the fields. They flood the fields, and they have large amounts of political donations, political lobbies and stuff that they frame it elegantly as water rights, but it's basically, we want to do whatever we want to do. It could cost us less money. It's not efficient. There are efficient and modern ways to do it, and they won't do it that way. But this is a ubiquitous Central Valley thing.
If you go back to Border Incident, which is a 1949 noir film, you can actually see that in the way they irrigated like these deep trenches around the fields, so where they would flood it and allow the water to kind of come in. So yeah, you can see that in the landscape even.
Yeah. Well, so bringing it back to Fury Road, I think
I got us way off right.
That's an incredibly prescient warning. I think that, you know, Fury Road is obviously climate disaster apocalypse, which makes it the second movie in a row that we've done about climate disaster and the apocalypse, because we just did Snowpiercer for our 14th episode. So you know, it brings us back to that kind of point where, you know, it seems like in Fury Road both some kind of man-made nuclear you know, war has taken place, which has kind of rendered everybody incredibly unhealthy and cancerous, and this seems to be going on for the next few generations in a row. But also, you know, climate disaster. It's completely like everything is a desert. Every, you know, green place is now kind of destroyed and taken over. Even the last ones that made it through this disaster have been completely, you know, decimated by drought. So that, you know, I felt like that clip is interesting because it shows that we're definitely going in at least one of those directions. You know, the droughts in California with climate change are getting worse. So as Fury Road, you know, was a few years ago, it's interesting that George Miller already kind of understood intrinsically that like that's the direction we were heading in.
Well, and it goes back to the first Mad Max, you know, which was 40 years ago, you know. I mean, George was 39 when he made Mad Max, the original, right? So he was already an adult and already had, as we well know, some pretty complex ideas about the world and the apocalypse that might or might not come, and that was really starting to be established that, you know, way back.
Yeah, and that first Mad Max, it was more about oil and gasoline.
But that apocalyptic sensibility was,
but that was also out of the inspired by like the oil shortages of the 70s.
Yeah, the oil crisis.
So it's a little, you know, there's a different crisis that was inspiring it, but it's built into this one cohesive universe where I mean, he spent 20 years making this movie, so.
Yeah,
I was gonna say there's a couple theories about the chronology of the movie, not the least of which is that obviously the Mad Max we see in Fury Road is like the feral child grown up, but I think one of the more interesting ones is that Fury Road is like I think you call it an interquel, like not prequel, not sequel, but like between. So it's between Mad Max and the Road Warrior, and that because you kind of see like in Fury Road, like he's kind of figuring it out. Right, like he doesn't come in like stone badass, like action hero, like savior of the universe. But then between Mad Max and Road Warrior, like he's already kind of a badass. So I think that's like a way more interesting. And I think George doesn't give a damn about the chronology or doesn't think about continuity at all. But
I was watching interviews with him yesterday because I cut some clips for this conversation, and he was talking about the chronology, and he's like, it actually doesn't. None of the chronology adds up, and like it would have to be 3 weeks. It would have to be 3 weeks after the first one. So it'd have to be like he gets thrown into the situation. 3 weeks later, it's Fury Road, and then he's like the chronology would have to be like on such a short interval.
But there's also the idea that like Mad Max as the folk hero, right? As like you know whether you're like multiversal theory or just like literally people telling stories around a campfire or whatever the equivalent to be in the post-apocalypse, like that it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter at all. But of course, the internet loves grinding on stuff that doesn't matter. We all know that.
Yeah. cinema sins and everything else.
And the other thing, just kind of pick up on Conan's point there. If you actually, if I remember correctly, during the when the third movie came out, George Miller was talking about how like at that point, because the timeline was kind of shifting a bit, and how he just kind of imagines it as like not as a chronological story, but as tales being told, so the narrator of the story isn't reliable because we're getting like a watered down version of it. We're not actually seeing the actual events.
But bring it to Kira and the sound design teams, really excellent. I mean, work on this. Like well-deserved Oscar-winning work on this. I thought it was interesting that during these interviews that people did with George Miller, a bunch of them in a row, he keeps talking about the process of movie making as being like music, or like being like he compares his wife's editing work to being like an orchestra. Like, and I cut a couple clips of it. I don't know if we could play them or not. It doesn't really matter for, I guess, the point that I'm trying to make. But I was wondering, when he was planning all of this out, how much of the sound design did he already have on those storyboards planned out, and how much was working with the sound design team to kind of come up with some of these incredible like incredibly multi-layered sound situations. Like the entire chase across the Fury Road is on a level must be like I don't even know how you manage to change some of the sounds and create like both music and diegetic dialogue like in the story.
Explosions, gunshots, stuff flying in the air.
Yeah, like it's all going at once. So I was hoping you could talk a little bit about that process.
I'm sure a lot was going on in George's head the whole time. That being said, the part of the process where this all where the sound folks start getting involved is actually often quite late in the game, right? So some of what they did in order to capture George's vision is that during the whole post process, there's somebody videotaping George like all the time. So that if he's in editing, video editing, and something comes to his mind and he wants to talk about this for CGI or this for sound or whatever, that's being captured, and he doesn't have to compartmentalize that and save it for later. He can just freeform express himself, and then someone would literally transcribe and color code his commentary so that we could then, the sound folks, look at the red stuff, for example, because that would, during his whatever meetings he had, he was talking about sound here, and then he was talking about visuals there, and he was talking about, music and score there, and everybody would get their notes. So you were constantly being fed stuff from outside of meetings, which is incredibly rare. Like usually, we might have some spotting sessions with the filmmakers, but it's, that's where we talk about sound. But for him, they recognized that he was going to be talking about sound whenever, and music and CGI and everything. So he just had to be filmed. And so by the time I was on board, there was already, a bunch of sort of documentation of George's ideas that had already been just saved for us but the actual, starting point actually happened years before I came on the show, because he had an Australian sound team working for years on this movie that took many years to complete. And so they already had this process flow of funneling that information through to effects people, to dialogue and ADR people, to Foley people, to composer. Everybody was getting these bits and pieces of information that had already happened whenever they jumped in. And then the American team wasn't involved until the initial mixing started. At first, he just had some American mixers come start to mix the thing, and then they were the ones to first sort of pose that there was something needed in terms of a little more sound design direction, and a little bit more on the dialogue side as well. So I was brought over with another guy to jump into the Australian team to add another element of, help, if you will. The tracks, what often happens in by coming back to what you're talking about what's gonna be the sound thing at any given moment of the movie, is in preparation, everybody is going all the time, right? So my dialogue and ADR track is full, and the composer's track is full, and the sound effects people's track is full, right? So you really have hundreds and hundreds of tracks and layers of stuff, and it's the mixing process where you start going, weeding out and saying, no, that has to poke through, that has to poke through. This is more of a music moment. This is where the sound effects have to take over. We have to feel the vehicles, whatever, right? So that again becomes a time when he is sort of massaging it. So everybody has created, though, these full tracks, which are always, being changed because the picture's being changed. So then the sound's being changed. So you have these timelines of, huge amount of stuff. And then he's poking different things through, doing more ADR, having more sound design done, having more special effects done, whatever. And then it gets remixed again. And
were there things from the actual vehicles and stuff that he kept in there, sounds that had happened organically?
The production sound was 90% unusable. That includes the dialogue.
90% dust, probably.
Very well. Between the fact that you have stunts going on the whole time, and you have the vehicles going, so the dialogue itself is not going to be well recorded. There's so much going on that no, you're not trying to capture that vehicle in that moment. And although he captured the dialogue, George happened to be someone who very rarely for a director is really into ADR. So he was fine with the fact that his stuff had to be all replaced. He did a bunch of animation, right? So he did the Babe series, right? So he had done animation. What he learned there was, I can improve on performances. I can cut my performances together. In his mind, there was no sync limitations. He could just have his people, his actors say the lines a bunch of times, and then he could sit in the edit room and cut together the dialogue to the picture just like he would in animation. Now, that put quite a lot of pressure on those of us who were trying to edit that ADR into sync. That was not something he would sit to. He would sit and pick ADR takes and then leave me in the room trying to make it all work somehow. But so he didn't have a strong sensibility about trying to maintain anything.
So the reason that I was asking about that is because he very publicly eschewed CGI for this movie as much as possible. I mean, obviously he took wires out and he took stunt people out, and he moved some takes into other things, but pretty publicly he didn't really want to do that much CGI in this. So I was wondering, how
for
much
obvious reasons, you want and again, this is not him alone, that organic sensibility. Humans can really still, we're very versed in it, right? We know when we're looking at something organic and when we're looking at something that isn't. So directors are very conscious of the fact that if they tilt too far in one direction, they are getting into supernatural or sci-fi, and that is a whole genre, and it's completely legitimate genre. But if you want to be in the organic world, you have to really watch your step. And the CGI is incredible what they do, but yeah, he wanted this to exist organically in the world for sure.
It makes it a little more timeless that way too, right? Like it's not going to look dated when the effects change. Like as much as like I still think Terminator 2 is a fantastic movie, but you look at the effects now versus when it came out. At the time I was like, oh my God, I've never seen anything like this. Now it's like, oh yeah, that's okay. That's like, no, you don't realize how many tens of millions of dollars that cost. Like at that moment in time, that was the upper echelon for effects.
But your eyes, this what always gets to me is water and ocean. I mean, there's just nothing you can do to make water look natural or make a sea or waves really look natural that aren't, those movies that are more CGI in that way are just never going to sell it to me.
Which is why water is such a commodity, No, but like even I was watching someone posted a clip from Spider-Man 2 where there's that really long fight scene with Doc Ock, and I was watching that earlier today because the new Spider-Man is coming out, and I remember watching it in the theater and thinking like, this is amazing. Like, I mean, I was a kid obviously, but I was thinking like, this is amazing. This is like the most realistic fight scene. They're fighting on a train. Like, who would ever think of this? And then I watched it today and I was like, oh no, like this is terrible. Like the CGI in it is not good.
Well, yeah, in the same way that like look at something like Gremlins or something, right? Like all the practical effects there, like they kind of look otherworldly at the time, and they still kind of look otherworldly and kind of freaky, even when it's being cute. And I think that's totally noticeable. Kira, one thing I wanted to ask you about is, with all the different things that you had to deal with, it seemed like there maybe were some kind of like mission improbable kind of tasks, right? Because you're talking about these stacked tracks, all this different stuff, and having listened recently and watched recently, and hearing like some like the Doppler effects stuff, and folks in music know there's certain tricks that you can do to kind of draw the attention of the listener, not including the fact that comping the dialogue. Like I'm a perfunctory vocalist at best, trying to be good. Whenever I record music with my band, like we do comp takes. We take the best of the vocal, and then like most people that aren't in the recording world will never think of that, but I just think like that's just like the vocal. Like you have like your ADR, you have like the score, you've got like things exploding, and there's just all kinds of different things to handle.
This is honestly true in most movies. You'd be kind of surprised to know how many tracks show up on the final mix stage for even a movie that is not an action movie. I'm sometimes surprised how wide sound effects editors will edit, and there's a lot of reasons for that. If you think about it from a mixer's standpoint and imagine their fingers on all the faders, right, on the big mixing console, they want things to be organized, and when you start trying to organize stuff, you keep them in distinct tracks. So sound effects people will have a set of tracks dedicated to just the tires in the various surfaces. That'll be a set of tracks. And then you will have, squeaks and bumps and, metallic. And then you will have winds. And then you will have hundreds of tracks, not always full, right? Because there are times when maybe if you're interior, your winds are a lot less interesting than exterior or whatever. Water is given its own dedicated tracks, of course, but maybe there are scenes where that's not applicable. So you'll have empty spaces too. So it's also because it's organized, you end up with all of these tracks. In big crowd scenes, I will suddenly have, a bunch of tracks of voices, where in other times when we're in the vehicles, we have a few voices going on at once. And even then, their dialogue, hopefully, most of the time, one person's talking at once, So you do end up just getting very broad, and that is true on all movies. And that's why the mixers in our field get the big bucks, because they're the ones who ultimately have to translate what the director is asking for pulling up and down the faders in a way to supply him of that in a reasonable amount of time, because mixing stages cost like $2,500 a minute, or something, so the time can't be spent that you would expect. It's not like the time when they're cutting the picture where they're just him and his wife sitting there editing, till all eternity. On the mixing stage, every minute counts. So that's why they are often treated with a lot of deference and treated as somewhat the top echelon in the sound field, because they are the ones who ultimately the buck stops with them to pull the right things up and the right things down at all these different moments.
You get a passive aggressive mixer, and the whole movie's shot from there. No,
get fired. Probably going to get fired in that case.
No, I'm just kidding.
Because, frankly, the director still calls the show.
No, I'm I'm completely kidding. So one of the scenes that I pointed out to, like, I rewatched it last night, and I pointed out to Andy and Conan, as one that I wanted to talk about was after the whole chase scene, when Max gets thrown off the rig, and he's in the sand, and there's that moment where everything's quiet after like 20 straight minutes of like loud noises where it's like really intense, and he pushes himself up, and you hear every single grain of sand in slow motion coming off of him. And I was, because I was listening to I was listening really hard to it, because I wanted to hear every piece of it so I could talk about it, and that just kind of blew me away. Even thinking of that, that I guess contrast between a fight or a whole chase that's just happened with every single element going at once, just switching to this like completely silent, and then like it almost sounds like one of those Rainmaker, like when they go, yeah. So every single grain of sand though moving in tandem. I don't know. I just found that like one of the most incredible.
And again, this is why the production sound, if it's not clean, right, it's just going to be a problem. If you want to only hear his breathing and the sand falling, right, then the breathing, pretty much can't be recorded there in the desert with the wind and now the crew moving around, right? It's going to have to be breathing that we record separately and very carefully cut into sync to match his face, and then have whatever sounds be added in order to, create that moment. So each moment is created, and the production track, is half the battle when you are using it, is trying to make it not have any elements you don't want in it. That's my job as a dialogue editor, right? It's like somehow create seamless dialogue that isn't offering up any distracting things. And mixers also get paid a lot of money just to make dialogue somehow quiet when it's recorded in often non-ideal settings.
And I mean, the dialogue is really important in this movie because there's so little of it, I think. So, every piece of information that you're getting throughout, the entire 2 hours is crucially important to understanding the story.
There's actually quite a bit of dialogue in it. I know there are sections where it's like action packed, but even during those action scenes, and those were some of the hardest, right? We still would then have pieces of information we needed to exert in, and you'd have this, one little tidbit of dialogue amidst this, all of this noise and music and sound and explosions and vehicles, right? But so-and-so, I can't really hear what she just said. It was this critical little bit, right? So it's again that, carving out that little bit of space without it feeling like the music drops out to get that through.
Well, and I think that's something I noticed with the recent rewatches, how much that stuff came through, and how in a lot of even action movies I like, it's important plot points are sort of drowned out by like, you bastard, explosions, and it's like, whoa, hold on, back that up. What did he just say? And it's very artfully done. And I think that's, are there any tricks to that? Like, do you use any EQ settings or like booster? I'm not like giving away the store or anything, but like what?
Well, no, there's no giving away. No, there actually aren't a lot of tricks. Honestly, one of the big differences when you don't go to the movies to watch. You rather listen at your home, right? And one of the reasons the movie theater experience actually helps so much is because there are more speakers, generally speaking. If you do not have a fancy sound set up at home to listen to movies, you don't have a dedicated center speaker. The movie theater does have a dedicated center speaker. That is where the dialogue is going to come from, and your music and effects can be pushed into more of a left-right thing, and in the surrounds and overhead now with Atmos, right? So you have this ability to move sound away from the dialogue a little bit and dedicate that center space. But that's only if you see it in the theater. And we're still always challenged to come up with a track which will play regardless. But yeah, I mean, yes, the human voice has a tendency to hit certain frequencies, and you can do some things to recognize that. And, you know, a low end rumble will interfere less with a female voice, especially, than something right in that mid range where we talk, because our ears are attenuated to that middle range where, you know, men and women speak, you know, so you can do some stuff frequency wise, but when you're being assaulted by a wall of sound, you know, even at a crowded restaurant, right? It doesn't have to be explosions in cars. It's tricky to pick out that one you're listening to and want to hear, and the only real solution is a volume one.
I always thought it was kind of interesting that you know, I'm actually good friends with Mark Allen Miller, who is a producer and does a lot of mixing, and absolutely loves like the challenge of mixing an album. He did MIA's recent re-release, where he only had like a copy of a cassette, and he was trying to master it for that. And he just absolutely loved the challenge. And I was wondering if you know, because I was looking on Discogs, and you haven't really done a lot of according to Discogs, which I know Discogs doesn't even have half my albums on it that I've worked on, because I do cover art. So I know it's not like a great you know, resource to find out everything, but it didn't really have you doing a lot of production work on albums outside of Dose, which is the band that you have with your husband.
My ex-husband.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Just to be clear, my husband is in the other room, and he's not a bass player.
My apologies.
Steve Discogs gets you into trouble.
Yeah, no, I should have focused on Wikipedia.
It's very similar in movies and in music. There is generally a hierarchy, if you will, of the people who are the decision makers, right? And you're right, I've been on a lot of records where I was not a key decision maker. Just like in most of the movies, I'm not a key decision maker on the mix. I'm relied upon for certain things and not relied upon for certain things, just like I would be on a record. Now, on Dose, we are both, you know, more of the decision makers. We're more of the songwriters. We're more of the producers. And you know, on different albums, especially on the last one, Mike gave me even more license to make decisions. And now my solo record's coming out next month, and that I got to make all the final decisions on. You know, so it's very much dependent on the situation. And when you're not a decision maker, it's very important to know when to be a good team player and to recognize that just because it doesn't sound the way you want it to sound, right, it doesn't mean it's wrong. It just means somebody else had a different sensibility. So in the movies I work on, my opinion is rarely required for what the mix should. As a matter of fact, it's appreciated that I just keep it to myself unless called upon.
Is it almost like ADR as being like the bass player of movies? In some
well,
cases?
no, the weird thing, of course, is the dialogue in ADR is absolutely critical to the movie. But what happens is the preparation and the foundation you create, the sync which is something I was talking about, making, presenting everything just so that the mixer has what he needs is critical. But deciding, how loud it should be and how loud every other sound's going to be that's competing with it, and whether or not I can articulate every syllable the same way that George Miller can, that's what's not required. My subjective sense of how loud things should be relative to each other, that's when it comes down to, well, George, what do you think? Right.
And that's one of the reasons why it plays as such a fully articulated vision as a film, I think, too, is because he's thinking about it.
Well,
like an immersive.
Oftentimes the mixers, again, I'll go back to that as just being a role, which is ultimately, they are, because they're put in a position where they are sort of at the top of the sound totem pole at that point, and they, with the director and the filmmakers, start to be this, back and forth there of them talking about the technical aspects and working with them and discussing it with them. And if the rest of the team hangs back, unless they look at us to say, hey, I want to get another ADR take, or can you have something here, right? So they bring in a team maybe for a different piece or element, but the actual decision makings on the mix, too many cooks. You've got just the mixers and often the director, maybe the picture editor, being the key people that are in the discussions of what's going on here. Oh, and the composer, but oftentimes the composer, it's interesting, it will come somewhat late in the game. We'll do a playthrough of a reel, or if they, as they say in Australia, a spool, which is, the movie is cut down into these pieces, right? We'll run that. And that's the point at which suddenly the composer is coming in and going, wow, the sound effects are getting all over the music and I can't hear my music. It's not being highlighted, and so then you start getting this power struggle between the music and the sound effects. A lot of times in an action movie like Fury Road, this was nonstop. And it's not a contentious thing. It's not even an ego thing necessarily. It's just physics, right? There's a whole bunch of sounds going on. What are we going to hear, and what are we going to tuck a little bit under so that something else gets featured?
And that's incredibly important in Fury Road specifically, because the action is all happening spatially in a really small area. It's like, for a lot of the movie, it's just going on during this chase, which all of these, rigs for the most part are next to each other. At times, some of them are in groups and then they're in other groups, but still, like, it's incredibly important that, people are fighting on top of the rig, and then all of a sudden it cuts to the inside of the rig, and then, it's the next one over, and all of those things are going to have completely different, spatially, completely different sounds that, have to be put to the front. So, like, it really is a masterpiece in that way.
It was that the mixing process went on, as is like to happen, but oftentimes they won't let it. We had a full mix schedule and mixed the movie, and then stopped and worked a bunch more, and then remixed the movie again because time ran out on the original mix and stuff still needed to happen. And George was given a huge amount of license. A lot of times schedules are not allowed to be quite that extensive, and not that much money is allowed to be spent, but in this case, there were 2 full final mixes with in between a period of 10 weeks, 6 of which I spent in Sydney, most of the time in a room with George, going through new ADR takes, cutting new ADR takes, and basically rejiggering all of the dialogue, and then going back and coming here for the second mix, then remixing things, because whenever you change the dialogue, of course, everything changes, because now you got to poke those lines through, but also a whole new set of sound design was laid over the top of the sound design that was already there. It was insanity. But the actual, number of mix days was much more than in most movies. And I think you put your head on it, that's the kind of movie it is. It was just that much of a struggle to figure out what are the right sounds and how to poke them through and then live with it and then change it. The actual picture changed as well, of course. So all the sounds had to be rejiggered sequentially, sync-wise.
Yeah, and it seems like that's kind of how the whole process of this movie specifically went, right? Because the storyboarding, I know Andy, like, Andy draws and he does comics and stuff, and it seems like it almost was like a fully fleshed out, comic for the most part, all around this giant room, right? The storyboarding aspect of it, like they wrote the entire movie as the storyboard, like down to the final details. And I was watching one of the storyboard artists talk about it and say, like, he would have an idea like, oh, maybe this person's missing a limb, and he'd have to go and just change all of the storyboards all over again to reflect that. Like, so I don't know, it seems like a very incredible process that like the completeness of it, I guess, and the thoroughness of it kind of probably extended the timeline by a huge amount.
And again, you've got that animation sensibility, which George has, so that probably had the same thing where he wanted to see it laid out in that storyboard fashion because he was used to doing that kind of work in the animation field as well, and then having it fleshed out after the fact in some ways, but that the actual writing is happening, as drawings in front of him so that he can be shuffling things around and adding details to them.
And my understanding too is it was like they started this movie back in the late 90s, and continued to work on this throughout. Like he stopped to work on Justice League, which never came out, and I can't remember if there's any other projects he did between the end of the 90s and this film, other than Justice League. But so like he put that time into it. It's not just that he did all this work. It was over time too to develop the story and change it, and that's why he has like 3 Furiosa movies and 2 more Mad Max movies ready to go, because
he does well, but he has that kind of mind too. But didn't he do, he did Babe and Happy Feet in there.
Happy Feet, that's what I'm missing. Yes.
Yeah, I was gonna say, it's not like he was just sitting around on his hands or nothing.
No.
And Happy Feet too. He has that under his belt.
Yeah. We were working insane hours. And most of us were used to it, right? And this guy's 72 years old, and he's matching us hour for hour for the most part. And most directors don't try to be there every bloody minute. And this guy he was incredibly forceful in the sense of just being able to keep up with the pace of this monster effort. People were dropping. You would walk by someone's office, who would just be kind of there at their screen, kind of maybe awake, maybe not. Their eyes are open. Just, it was just, he was a very impressive force from a standpoint of sheer energy, too. I got to the point where I embarrassed to say that I would hide from him at times, and just to have a cup of tea, because he was so intense. When he was over my shoulder and we were working, it was so intense that I would try to get 5 more minutes before I ended up in the room with him, because then it was till a lunch break or till he had a meeting. Most likely I was going to be just there going, just very impressive person with a lot, of fingers in a lot of pies. And I am not surprised at all that he had all of this laid out in terms of what he wanted to do next, and still does. And he'll be another one of those that keeps going forever.
Sounds like his work ethic is very similar to Greg Ginn in a way.
Boy, there's a opening up a nest of yes. There's a guy who likes to practice, he'd play his guitar 10 hours a day. I think George would absolutely outwork that man.
That's saying a lot too.
Yeah.
So I guess there's 2 themes I wanted to talk about in this movie, because a lot of the time we go through each movie and it's kind of evolved over time to like first kind of just going through the plot to now kind of we go through things thematically. So a theme that I wanted to go through, and this definitely plays into the sound editing aspect too, is trauma. Throughout this movie, it's incredibly clear that every character is dealing with this post-apocalyptic trauma. And, you know, and it manifests itself, I think, number one, in the fact that literally like the half-lives of, you know, a lot of the characters are happening because they have this cancer, and they've, you know, invented, I mean, the warlords kind of invented this whole like kind of demigod system, I guess, because, you know, that's how you have to do it. So their trauma is kind of like the war boys' trauma is kind of negated by this kind of like this frenzy, I guess, of devotion to Immortan Joe. But at the same time, you know, Max is going through his trauma, and you see it throughout the movie. And I guess that's where the sound editing piece comes in, because he's having these hallucinations the entire time, and he's seeing his family who he let die, and everyone's saying like, you said you were going to save us, you said you were going to save us. And, you know, it plays into like, you know, redemption. Like everybody's trying to get redeemed for what they've done traumatically throughout this whole like post-apocalyptic wasteland, I guess. So I mean, opening it up to anyone that wants to comment on that, but that's that kind of
in some ways Furiosa is the only one who seems completely impervious to whatever trauma she has endured. She is the rock upon which the whole story is really based. You know, she has to succeed. She's going to pull these women out of there, and in a way Max is just in her way much of the time, right? So he's just another obstacle in her path trying to achieve what she's going to achieve. She comes across to me as sort of this epitome of a survivor, not, you know, warrior, not going to let anything, and not, you know, we don't see her past. We don't see her, you know, having weak moments. She's just never.
She's the badass.
She is. She just never cracks, you know, and everybody else does, you know, has their moments where they just, you know, Max is constantly cracking, you know. Yeah. He's almost a complete anti-hero, you know, where you just half the time you're like, dude, just get it together. Like
you let your family die. You know, it happens. Just push on. You know?
It really is over now, and you have this new opportunity to be of some use here and now if you can just pull it off.
Do some good. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. This is a Furiosa movie.
Oh, absolutely.
And George Miller is so in love with this character, right? And Charlize was just, you know, a goddess for him. You know, she was so perfect for it, and he treated her completely different than everyone else. From the little bit I saw, you know, she was completely, you know, as an actress, was somewhat the same as her character. It's in a couple of her scenes are the only scenes that the production was used because it was just perfect to begin with. And ADR, everybody else was put through a grueling grind of hundreds and 200 takes per line. And Furiosa, maybe 6.
Yeah.
No, we've got it. You know, I mean, so there was this whole thing, even, you know, sort of in real life, that made her sort of this special, unique character and actress, becoming the character. It just felt right to him the whole way, whereas he would, you know, everybody else was going through the gauntlet via George, you know, behind the scenes, you know, in some ways he would put them through a gauntlet and allowed her, she's already doing it just right. She's, you know, she's fine the way she is, you know. So
and he gave her different training than the rest of the women, right? Like they went to the Eve Ensler, like the that kind, like her, like the those kinds of seminars, and she went to like the guys like military war seminars that he had.
Well, right, she had to become a warrior. The wives did not need to although they end up being strong in their own right, they weren't expected to be warriors from minute one, whereas she was going to be the warrior. She was going to have to be, doing superhuman things. And but it's interesting how that, the whole thing, even years after the filming, it was sort of still happening, where she was, sort of riding this whole different layer of arc than everybody else.
I mean, made for an incredibly compelling character. And I mean, I think she's a fantastic actress, but it's by far my favorite performance of hers. I mean, it's up there with like Monster or something where you're like, oh my God, that's like, is that even acting? That you just became a different person. That's crazy.
Mm-hmm. You don't appreciate her Arrested Development story arc?
I love it. I love Arrested Development.
All the reindeer game.
Yeah, I think you're 100% right on that, and it definitely comes out throughout the movie, and she's definitely like the most together out of everybody in the movie too. Which also is its own reaction to trauma. I think hitting back at that.
Course.
Yeah.
Of course, yes. She has built a suit of armor because of that. And there's no doubt in anybody's mind that her suit of armor, that her warrior mentality is the only way she survived. And that was her survival methodology. The wives have their methodology and how they survived and the role that they played. And the war boys survive by their idea of going to heaven, if nothing else, right? If I just succeed in giving up my life in a certain kind of way, then I will live forever and have the most successful sort of life too, right? So there's redemption, as you said, but also this method of survival that's geared into everybody at every level.
Yeah, and I mean, I know that
Max is the only one who doesn't have a clear course to success. He's basically failed already, and he's going to, redemption maybe, but there's no clear sensibility of him surviving and thriving.
He barely even has a story arc in this. You know what I mean? Like, he's not. He doesn't undergo really character development.
But besides the first one, does he ever really?
Yeah, I mean, I was gonna say that's not unique to the franchise though, and I think one of the most interesting things that I kind of picked more up on this go round was that at the end, okay, Furiosa, missing the mechanical arm, battered, beaten, and tattered, like has led them back to salvation, and then Max doesn't stay. It's like his atonement is not complete for him to allow himself to stay, which I didn't really pick up on that so much the first time, because I think I was just sort of like, oh my God, like refractory period, right? But like I really got that this time where I'm like, oh, that's one of the most interesting scenes for Max in the whole movie, that he's like, nah, man, I can't, I'm not ready for this. And I think that that's real interesting, especially for, as we've basically got into, that like the titular character is not really the main character, but that's the most important part of his arc, is like even all of this that's happened, and like him, like, basically finding a reason to be again, and assisting in this incredible endeavor that starts off as a chase, ends up in a race, but he's not ready. He's not ready for what happens next. And that was pretty, that kind of hit me a lot harder this time than it did the first time.
It's also interesting that George Miller talks a lot about, in all of his interviews, about the commodification of human life, right? The commodification of humans as the true commodity in this movie, as much as water is kind of treated as a commodity, as much as everything else.
He's the gas bag at the beginning. Yeah. Right? So Max is purely there to get the engine running, right?
Yeah.
So it's interesting though that
it's a real thing. That's a real thing that they would do before they had a capacity for blood transfusions in the field. They would have universal donors hang out in wars. I mean, not hang out, but you know what I mean. Like they would be around.
hang with the thing in his arm.
Yeah, literally hanging out. Yeah.
No, but like, so it's interesting. It's really interesting on like just a title level almost. Mad Max, isn't the main character in this. He's kind of
Fury Road, the way we refer to the movie really is Fury Road. Mad Max was almost there just to make sure everybody knew that there was a relationship between this movie and some other
exactly.
movies.
So that name is kind of a commodity in the sense of like that name is kind of what's selling you the movie, whereas that, you know, has very little to do with the actual the plot moving forward. So that's kind of interesting that there's that connection that I didn't really make until now. But yeah. And I think that he really, like, he doesn't have like a development arc. I think he's, you know, it really is Formosa's development arc, and everybody else in the movie kind of has a way of handling their trauma. I know that you know, George Miller said that he kind of got inspired by like kamikaze pilots for the War Boys characters, but it kind of also reminds me of like you know, I mean, throughout the last like couple decades, you know, people get turned to like religious fundamentalism, and you know, when people sacrifice themselves as like terrorists in these situations, like kind of the same thing, this like overall devotion to a concept.
The suicide bombers are absolutely kamikazes.
Yeah. So it's interesting that this kind of trope of like, you know, people that are in situations that are just so awful in so many places, living in poverty, that see like that fundamentalism as the only way out. You know, like taking that to the most, I mean, it's already at a pretty extreme level, but taking it to its most extreme level in the War Boys, where their entire purpose, it's not like they're indoctrinated from different areas, like they're indoctrinated from birth. It's interesting to take that in a post-apocalyptic sense, where there really is no hope of anything being different for them. Like, it's not like they ever see an outside world. They're turned into like these I mean, because you don't really ever see them fighting other warlords or anything. You know, they're kind of they're
but in a sense, they're raised up from the people who are just there waiting for the water to be turned on, right? We get a couple of glimpses at the people around the base of the towering rock who just are completely have nothing. You know, they don't even have the honor that the War Boys, they can't even, you know, have the Valhalla. They have to just, you know, die of thirst. You know, they have no survival. No, they're the absolute lowest of the wretches. The War Boys, in a sense, have been lifted up into this, you know, place where they have a purpose and they have a possibility for, you know, a heaven.
Well, and that's why I think Nux's storyline is so interesting, right? Because I mean, like, he basically gets deprogrammed from the cult. He comes back, you know, out.
And it doesn't take it doesn't take very much. It takes somebody else beating the crap out of him a little bit, and then him falling in love.
What do you mean?
Yeah.
I mean,
the girl.
Let's not short sell it. I know you just broke up recently, but let's not short sell it.
Of course, the beautiful woman changed him.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the other theme I think that we just touched on that I wanted to bring up for this is like the disposability of human life, and there's that great line that is said to him about the wives, where he's like, you can't own another human being. Eventually they'll rise up and push back. So through, you know, that's kind of intrinsically within this movie, is everybody is disposable in this new situation. Everybody's commodified. They only really exist to serve Morton Joe. So that kind of comes up over and over again. And so that's one of the other ones I wanted to bring back up.
If I can, real quick, I just want to think it's interesting that one thing that I hadn't thought about when I first saw it was just the idea that, you know, Morton Joe is like, he's the hero of his own story, right? Like, he's not like, I'm gonna go do evil now and be oppressive. And in his mind, like, he's got these hordes of people that, like, he can't trust to look out for their own best interests, so he's attempting to do his best for them in some weird, messed up, you know, kind of ways that you know, unitary executive control tends to bring out of people, and has become corrupted by only thinking about the results rather than the efforts to get there. And I found his character way more interesting. I mean, visually, obviously, dude is like, you know, that's a great visual, right? I loved all that, but I was thinking more about his character this time.
Very sickly individual, though. He's not living the good life, really.
No, and he's got that like chest piece that makes it look like he's got pecs, which is hilarious and so awesome. Like, you know, the fake pecs, like, oh, I'm gonna put on my He-Man outfit, right?
It's also really funny that in this movie, Tom Hardy isn't the Bane. Like, you can kind of hear him sometimes with that voice, but like a Morton Joe kind of is the Bane character, and he's in that connection. But I don't know. There's one piece of dialogue that I heard that Tom Hardy said that I instantly that clicked again for me. Like, oh yeah, he was. But yeah,
I think this is one of his better roles too, and even with like the character being like ostensibly like supporting in some factor, and even with the titular character being the supporting I think it's like one of his more interesting roles, and I think he nails it too, because he's supposed to be conflicted and lost, right? That's the point.
And the little thing of just that little Australian lilt that Mel Gibson had as in the role, you know, the fact that he brought that in, just, you know, because like what was it like you know, Charlize Theron's from South Africa, and she didn't use her regular accent, which is not that far off from Australian, but she used an American accent, and then he specifically got, you know, even though he's English, he's using, you know, he's just putting enough of that the Australian lilt in there, just you know, because Mel Gibson has a very slight lilt.
The outtakes of the ADR, Tom will also, when he gets to about take 50 or 60, he gets so frustrated that he'll start going into Cockney. He'll go, he'll just start like literally throwing accents around. I'll tell you that the accent is not at all consistent, and much of that is sheer frustration with the lines. And George will still listen to every single one to see, you know, it'll start going to Cockney, and I'll look at him like, we're not going to keep going through these. And like, next one. We have to take it to its whole logical conclusion. But his accent, I think, probably wavers a little. If you really were to analyze it, it wavers quite a bit. But I think you're right. He is trying to hold Max, and of course George is trying to have him hold Max. But I think that again, because of this animation thing or whatever, the performances line by line were so much more important, you know, for the moments to hit, that if the accent wasn't quite right, he'd have still picked the performance over that for sure. You know, so you'll probably hear some cases in which the accent's a little bit not quite, but, you know, it sounds a little more British here, but the performances allow you to just, you know, ride with it.
Yeah. It's also interesting that he seems to George seems to pluck a lot of these actors out of like theater and like you know, Shakespearean work, and like all of these like really interesting places that you wouldn't necessarily go to look for action movie actors. So I found that really fascinating listening to him talk about, because Toe Cutter is in this movie too, as like the main villain, and like as a Morton Joe. So like it's interesting that, you know, in the original Mad Max, his like all of the biker gang that he had was his Shakespearean troupe that he was going around with at the time. So I don't know. I found that really fascinating, because
very unconventional director, to put it mildly.
Kira, did you watch the original movies when they came out? Like, were you?
Yes. I wouldn't say that I was necessarily, you know, any more additionally enamored with them than a bunch of other movies. Like, I had seen them, and they certainly, you know, obviously, just like Fury Road, I sort of sit in this category, you know, somewhat on their own. But yeah, I watched them, and they stuck with me for the same reason they do with people, because at the time they were just so out there in left field, you know. I gotta say, when it came time for awards and stuff, the fact that Revenant was the movie, you know, that was the other big movie of the year, and it was so hard, because I was so sure that looking back, everyone would hold, you know, Fury Road would hold so much more water than Revenant would, you know. I mean, and Revenant's a good movie, but Fury Road is just so unique and special, you know, and watching that happen was like a slow motion train wreck, which you knew. I just knew afterwards people would look back and go, yeah, but which movie do you want to go see again?
Yeah, I mean, we covered that when you were on Protonic, but I mean, I was pretty upset about that. That was the one thing I was sort of like, really? Like the bear movie one over. Come on. I mean,
You
nothing wrong with
you
it,
just
but-
want him to be killed by the bear, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Kind of like Dances with Wolves, man. You just want the Indians to kill the guy.
Yeah,
Why?
just get this over with.
Kill the guy.
It felt like when that movie won, it felt like they were kind of giving a consolidation prize for Leo a little bit, because there's just been so many times he had been in like big movies and then something else had taken that spot from him. So
And that does happen in the Academy for sure. But and I don't even mean this about awards. It was just this whole sensibility of like the two great movies that year, and I just couldn't see them even in the same ballpark. And it's happened on other years with other great movies, so it's certainly not a unique situation. But I had obviously spent so much blood and sweat on this one that it was pretty hard to watch. I mean, even we have these awards we give each other that called the Golden Reels, where it's basically the sound people giving, sound people. So there's even a dialogue award and a sound effect award. And of course, because they had to give the sound effect award to Fury Road, the dialogue award went to Revenant.
I just remember reading all these articles that year, and none of them were like, oh, like the Revenant's a movie you need to go see or something. You know what I mean? Because sometimes, like with Nomadland, I think people were like, and I'm not even like that big a fan of Nomadland. I mean, it's a really, it's a nicely filmed movie, but there were a lot of people that are like, you need to see Nomadland, like. You know what I mean? Like, there's a lot of articles. I don't remember anyone being like,
years in the van, dude.
Yeah,
Like,
exactly.
I don't remember-
Exactly.
I
When
don't-
you've toured, it's sort of like, all right, yeah, I've seen Nomadland. I just didn't see the.
No, but I'm saying, like, there were all of these articles breaking down like the themes and all this stuff. I don't remember that happening with Revenant. I remember every article coming out around that time. They're like, Leonardo DiCaprio finally wins Oscar. That's kind of like the bottom line from that movie, taking the win.
Yeah, and sure, and you could maybe even argue that performance-wise there was something that was such a top to bottom performance, whereas Fury Road had so many performances going on, and it had so lush with so many concepts and visuals and everything that it was more of an amalgamation of everything as opposed to a single performance. But I'd put Charlize up against him any day, personally.
No joke.
All right. It seems like that's a good place to go to final thoughts on this movie. I mean, we could definitely break down like we could do like a 6-hour podcast on this and break down like every single element. But I'm trying to keep these down a little bit more.
So I have a question for you guys, which is, do you know what it's about?
Yeah. I mean, like, but also, so do you know what it's about can cover a lot of things, which is pretty amazing about it. Because I mean, I think that there's so many answers to that. Like, obviously, like the surface level is climate disaster and how humanity would survive a disaster to this magnitude. But then there's so many different themes. You know what I mean? There's the feminist themes throughout it. There's the themes of like triumph. There's the themes of redemption. There's the themes of trauma. And I think all of those are like valid answers, which makes it a really incredible movie, because I don't think any of those trumps the other one, because sometimes there's like one theme and then there's a bunch of other themes below it. And I think that this is one of those movies where all the themes kind of coincide in this like really beautiful, this really beautiful creation.
True that.
Yeah.
To me, it was one that, of course, I never really got to see it cold in a single watch, and then have a response to it. So I always wonder about it, because people would ask me questions about things, and to this day, it's not black and white, to me at all. Is
it chrome?
It's chrome. It's way chrome. It's just not. There are so many themes going on, mother's milk, just put aside water, okay, we've got that. aspect, and there's just so many things thrown in, so many sub themes and stuff that I wonder, is it just too hard of a movie for people to get on a single watch? And that's
it's definitely a multi-watch. It's definitely a multi-watch movie.
I mean, I think it's about humanity ultimately, like both like the loss of and the finding of, and what that means for the different characters. And again, there's nuance that I didn't catch the first time, and I loved it the first time. But then like there's stuff I was like, oh, I didn't even think about it from like this, these folks' perspective over here. And like again, we've talked a lot about the commodification of humans and like objectification and so on and so on. But I think that is just as important, but I think it hits on a few levels, and it hits on a few levels that things that are real, like the woman that's got the seeds, right? There's an actual seed bank. I think it's in like Norway or something, that like, after the bomb drops and like everything dies, there's this cave that you can go to that like has all the different seeds to basically repopulate the earth.
Yeah, I think there's more than one of those. I think
you're probably right.
Yeah,
the one I know about, I saw some special about it. I don't know, like I'm not an authority on seed banks or anything, but I know that does exist. And I heard you have
the number one seed bank podcast.
Yeah, exactly. it's very niche, but we do our thing really well.
It's Conan Neutron and the Protonic seeds.
Yeah, exactly. But I like the idea that they brought in actual, George brought in things that are real life concerns as we sort of like teeter towards apocalypse in the same way that we have, for the last 40 years or so, but with much more awareness of it, yet still managed to make it about humanity. I think it succeeds in the same way. It succeeds on the same goal in a different way than like a movie like Children of Men does, which I also like quite a bit, where there's a spectacle and like, all the it's crazy action scenes and stuff blowing up, whatever. But essentially it's about, what does it mean to be human? How do we hold on to that in adverse situations? What do we do?
It's
really,
movie. Come on, it's a chase movie.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a movie about a car chase.
It's a chase and a race. That's
you gotta chase after him until you get the guy.
They chase him across the desert, and they're racing on the way back. It's great. It's gonna be aces.
It's a bad backs.
It's fascinating to have done this back to back with Snowpiercer, because I feel the same way about Snowpiercer. I've watched Snowpiercer probably 10 times, and every single time I notice something different, and I notice it from a different perspective, and it feels like the entire movie combines to be about humanity in much the same way. And obviously they're both like dystopic climate disaster movies, so it's really, we're shooting this obviously Wednesday. It's going to go up next Tuesday for everybody. But talking about Snowpiercer as much as we did on Sunday, was like, and then watching this movie like, a day later or something, it almost feels like it could be like comparatively in my mind, it's like these are two movies that work on very similar levels.
Yeah, better throw on a Happy Feet next week or something, like get a power there.
Pig in the woods.
There you go.
Pig in the city.
I'm excited to see that, actually. That looks great.
All right, Andy.
He also did Lorenzo's Oil, just which is an amazing movie.
Forgot about that one. So you want my closing thoughts? One thing.
Well, Kira asked the question. I like that as an ending question. She asked the question, what do you think the movie is about?
Before I answer that, I just want to throw one quick thing about color, just because the color wasn't like a theme in the movie like some films rely on it. However, because he took a Maxfield Parrish palette of the orange sand against the rich blue sky, it just was, you could not stop looking at it because of those contrasting colors. And if you know anything about color theory, opposite colors look really good next to each other. That's why Maxfield Parrish's paintings always looked like that. So it's so nice to see what a Brahm painting would look like if he actually used a Maxfield Parrish color scheme. And if you're a nerd like me, you kind of get those references. If not, talk to me on Twitter. It's right there. Just hit me up. I'll be happy to explain it all to you.
Tell him why he's wrong. Yeah.
Yeah, tell me why I'm wrong. Anyways, but what I think the movie is about, it is about like not just what it means to be human, but like how to keep your humanity in like when everything is commoditized in such like I almost want to call it a neoliberal landscape, because that's kind of what it is in a way, but it's not actually neoliberalism. It's like,
it's what happens after neoliberalism.
Yeah,
really.
It's like post-neoliberalism anarchism.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Feudal art, not even oligarchy. I don't even know. Yeah.
Libertarian dreamscape or something.
Well, no, I mean it's like it's neo-feudalism. It's what happens after neoliberalism is over. Is like a series of warlords probably would take over, and everybody would be in these feudal situations. Now, in our case, they're not. They wouldn't be warlords. They'd probably be billionaires. Like, you know what I mean? Like, so that's kind of the neoliberal hierarchy is like Bill Gates has bought up the entire United States and puts a mask on.
Well, I mean, Immortan Joe probably was like Jeff Bezos at one point.
Yeah, we got Elon over here. We got Bezos over there. Bill Gates said they divide up the country. Sure, yeah.
And that is just to jump on that. That is true survival, right? Is that you by holding on to whatever level of humanity you have survived. You don't survive unless you have held on to some kind of humanity. We won't call you a survival, or if you have lost every ounce of humanity. That's not going to be the word we use with you.
Well, and that's one of the things. I was just gonna say that's one of the things that actually Max's arc does have is like he's gonna be like, I'm just gonna be alone now. Like that's my thing. I'm gonna be, and then like he kind of starts on the path to like having connections with people again, but isn't ready. Obviously, by the end, like he's like, nope, can't hang.
So, but in that same way, Immortan Joe and everybody in his family kind of is completely inhuman in the way that they look, in the way that like they've created like these like air mask apparatuses for themselves, like. They're guzzling like no, so they have all of these like contraptions over them, and
But at the same time, though, he gives water to the poor plebes that he takes care of, and that's how he holds on to his humanity, is to tell himself he is a benevolent dictator.
Yeah, but that's also how he holds on to power.
But I mean, but the thing is, it's like any dictator. That's how they hold on to their humanity.
We want to call him human because he gave them a little water.
No, I'm just saying that's how he sees that he's holding on to his humanity.
Mussolini kept the trains running at times too.
Hitler probably did. Gave.
Yeah,
he probably thought
there were water. There's a little water in the concentration camps, I'm sure.
Yeah, but Biden's supposedly trying to let in more immigrants, even though he's not funding the things that Trump cut. So nothing's going to change. But he's pretending he's doing something positive in a way to tell himself that he is still human.
Yeah,
and maybe when you get that much power, you only have to give lip service to being human.
That's real.
All right. Well, I think I'm going to cut it there. Kira, thanks so much for doing this. This was really amazing. And
yes,
this could have been this could have been like a 6-hour episode breaking down every single theme. So I've been trying to have a little bit more podcast discipline. So yeah, I'm gonna leave it there.